Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. You all have sat through panels. What we're excited about for this one is it's going to be incredibly informative and not unscripted, but we've done a lot of practice to make sure it's informative and conversational. So you've read the brief, you're here on purpose. We're going to jump right in. I'm going to do a quick introduction of myself and our panelists, and then we're going to jump into the questions. I do acknowledge with a lot of things going on budgetarily, there is a 9:30 session. It is completely appropriate if you do want to step out at 9:30. You will miss probably the best 15 minutes of your life here between 9:30 and 9:45. But the reason why we did get your information in the front is that we will be able to send you a recording of this afterwards. Typically in panels, especially the 9:30, the first 5 to 10 minutes is going to be introductory, so don't worry if you don't leave right away, you'll be fine. We appreciate your time. And then as a follow-up, Mr. Robert Bond did get sick, and so we have actually one of our key head engineers here as well. So you've got just an incredible person joining us today. So we will get started. My name is Kimberly Brown. I'm the head of marketing at Darley. I have a wide background in commercial growth within manufacturing facilities and government organizations. Matt Dursa, to my left, is our Chief Legal Officer and Chief Compliance Officer at Darley. He actually began his career as a Strategic Sea Lift Officer in the Navy Reserve. He was an active duty Navy JAG Corps, and he currently serves as a commander in the Navy Reserve JAG Corps as well. Dr. Amanda Normand, and I really am so honored that I can call Amanda a doctor now. I will be referring to everyone by their first names after this, but I will say again, Dr. Amanda. She is our Senior Manufacturing and Systems Engineer at Darley, leading our engineering team. And she's actually one of the foremost leaders nationally and potentially now as things get even more specialized globally in the application of systems engineering principles in high-mix, low-volume manufacturing environments. And Mike Severson is our Manufacturing Operations Manager, who again specializes in high-mix, low-volume manufacturing, which we're going to be talking about today, focusing on data analysis and optimization of that to get outcomes specifically for our government customers and the military. Okay, so Matt, we're going to get started. What we're going to do is start with some basic levels, and then we're going to build as we go. So Matt, this was a question that came up, and I didn't realize how nuanced the answer was, but what is a small business from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. A lot of times when people say small business, there's a stereotype of a mom and pop shop or a veteran working out of their garage. And there's a lot of businesses doing great work at that size, right? But small businesses can be incredibly complex and incredibly capable. So when we talk about what is a small business, and this is the part, again, it's 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Some of you went out last night and you're probably thinking, I really hope a lawyer starts using acronyms. Well, don't worry, this is the good part. So we look at the federal acquisition regulations, and the FAR tells us that in order to know what a small business is, we go to the SBA's, the Small Business Administration's table of small business sizes. So when we refer to that table, and that table is several pages long, it's split out by industry codes, so specifically the North American Industrial Classification System, or NAICS code, right? So every industry and every opportunity is classified with a NAICS code. Now, looking at that code, we go to 2 columns, and there's either going to be a cap on revenue or a cap on employee size. And these numbers sometimes don't quite line up with our expectations. For example, a new car dealership is a small business if it has less than 200 employees. Can have as much revenue as they want as long as they have less than 200 employees. A used car dealership is a small business if they have less than $31.5 million in revenue. They could have unlimited employees as long as the revenue stays below that cap. So it's either going to be a cap on revenue or a cap on the number of employees, and that's going to depend on the specific industry we're talking about.
Great. So the takeaway from that, like Matt said, is it depends. And it depends on the NAICS code and what we're trying to do, which comes into play very strategically in this conversation and why it's important. We're going to take one more step in with Matt, and then we're going to actually go down the line here What is a set aside? So we know what a small business is. The small business is anything depending on the industry that you're in and the NAICS code that you use. And there's lots of NAICS codes depending on industry and function, and it can vary by employee count or revenue count depending on what you decide. And now, when we're kind of talking about federal defense, there's set-asides. So what is a small business set-aside, and why do they exist?
Yeah, so a set-aside, typically people when they use that term are talking about an opportunity where competition is limited to small businesses. So assuming that there is enough competition, right, you need at least 2 small businesses in that field, then that opportunity is going to be limited to small businesses. But that also includes, we have total small business set-asides where that opportunity is only being competed on by small businesses, partial small business set-asides where part of that opportunity, and then, although maybe not completely a set-aside, we also talk about completely competitive contracts that might have a small business subcontracting plan mandated. So even a large business is mandated to subcontract a portion of that business. Mm-hmm. And the why, there's several reasons why. So, from the Small Business Administration standpoint, small businesses are an economic driver. They're important to our nation's economy. They're important to our jobs. From a DoD perspective, they're a strategic initiatives, right? We know that small businesses are great at innovation. We know that they help diversify our supply chain, right? If we think about World War II is kind of a classic example, right? If we go to the Atlantic Theater, if you want to disrupt the German supply chain, there's a series of big factories that are connected by 1 or 2 bridges. And if you take out one of the links in that chain, you take out that whole supply chain. And we were able to do that, to hit certain bridges or certain factories and really disrupt our enemy's supply chain. When we turn to the Pacific, right, where there might not be a huge factory, there might be 200 workshops in one city all working on a component, it became much more difficult for us to disrupt that supply chain. And so that sort of resiliency, that web-based supply chain, that's what we need to achieve for lasting value.
Yeah, and if we look at the Navy's strategy, working with small businesses for those strategic ends is very clearly laid out. And so that's why we're here in this conversation, is to make sure we're achieving our national defense goals. So thank you, Matt. Let's go down another level now. We've talked about what a small business is. We've talked about set-asides and why they exist. So now small business manufacturing. I'm gonna tee this up and then I'm gonna hand it to Amanda to take the next step. So in an overly simplified context, there are 2 types of manufacturing: traditional, which is low mix, high volume, and then actually the more common, less well known, is high mix, low volume. Now, Amanda is going to talk about the power of the high mix, low volume manufacturing model, which is, Amanda, you can correct me if I'm wrong, actually very commonly used by small business manufacturing, specifically in the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. In the high mix, low volume space, we're thinking about manufacturing and production flow in a really different way. So if you're looking at your high volume production lines, it's typically your product is flowing through your manufacturing, it's going in one direction, it's a single flow. You have a lot of lines that are set up and they're very specific to that product line. When we look at the high mix, low volume space though, it definitely looks quite a bit different. So we have this entire shop floor, and if we were to take and draw lines in the production flow, this is the way that the product moves through it. Every component, every end product, it would look more like a big bowl of spaghetti, basically. But what that does for us is it allows us to have so much flexibility in our manufacturing space. So if you think about the low volume side of that, our batch sizes, they're not going to be continuous runs of thousands that are going through production. They're going to be things like 30 parts that are coming through at a time and flowing through that entire manufacturing system, but in a really unique way. So we don't focus on the numbers side of it quite as much in terms of what your production needs to look like, what kind of production numbers you need to hit. We're focused more on what that flexibility is. And it allows us to be just incredibly adaptable. There's so much that we can adapt within that customized full system. That's much harder to do when you have single production line flow.
Yeah. And so for, I don't know, some of the individuals in the room, Darley, for example, manufactures the Tagers and the P100, right? So these are critical pieces of equipment that have a finite volume attached to them but are highly complex, right, Amanda? So when we're putting these through, we don't care that we've made 1 million parts, and our end users want to make sure that the ones that we do make are exactly right. So we talk about that value exchange, right? That you're not getting close enough, right? That our end users, our military, get exactly what they need, not close enough in a high volume. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Again, the flexibility gives so much customization, and it gives you the opportunity to adjust at any time to any changing need that you might have on the production floor.
So I'm going to double click into what you said and hand it off to Mike. We understand now that the model that we're working with is really complex. And Mike is on that floor and has a lot of inputs, highly complex inputs. So Mike, you make, it's not magic, right? That's actually like a science. But I want to hear you explain how you go from the directive of, we have a contract or a program that we're going to deliver on, and here is the date, and you have what kind of inputs that come in, and how do you manage that in the reality that you work in this really flexible environment that isn't what we think of as a traditional, highly automated factory floor, right? Because we're flexible and adaptive, which makes your life kind of hard.
Yes, from a practical standpoint in manufacturing, when you have a flexible system, we generally run an ERP system over top of everything, and that gives us a general guideline, I guess you will, to follow. But what we do is we focus more on the flexibility, both in our long-term planning and our day-to-day operations. So there's no single bottleneck or stress point that we can't adjust on the fly. Everybody knows there's issues that pop up in a manufacturing setting on a day-to-day basis, anything from non-conforming incoming material all the way through supply chain issues and actually getting something when you need it. So in order to meet customer needs, we need that flexibility in our system to adapt, change, or do things differently on the fly. So we've set up our entire manufacturing shop floor with that in mind. We don't have the traditional lines like you would in normal manufacturing. Everything is treated as an individual cell, but that takes a little more planning up front to get the same achievable goals at the end.
Right. So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question and give a little more, I don't know, credit to the work that you do. So when we're talking about small business manufacturing, and this isn't just about Darley, by the way, like we are successful in what we do, and we're successful because we believe in the country and the models that we are. So we are successful because we want other small business manufacturers to be successful. So Mike, you told me in one of our prep sessions that we manufacture, and I really want to highlight this because of Matt's point earlier, to hopefully violate any picture in your head of what a small business manufacturer is. So we manufacture 40% of the components that go into, for example, a pump, like a P100, right? And I'm just an example, a pump. And that's sitting out on the terrace if you want to take a look at it. Every component has 5 to 10 operations internally, meaning 5 to 10 things, steps that need to happen to make one component. And there are anywhere from 100 to 400 components on an end product. So one product, let's say, has 400 components, and we're manufacturing half of those. And in order to manufacture half of those takes us 10 steps. And this is done in a small business manufacturing environment with highly skilled engineers that have to be precise. Not good enough, but precise, because who here is a service member? We've got some in the audience, yeah? Because lives are on the line. This isn't a nice to have, this isn't a shoe, right? This is a life-saving piece of equipment. And so, Mike, you're handling incoming supply materials, talent, like the humans on the floor, right? Machining. So talk a little bit about how you're managing on that day-to-day, those different components.
Sure, it's on a daily basis, when you run a highly flexible system, you leave a lot of room in your system for the unplanned things or high reaction things that you need to do on a daily basis. So we actually set our system up so about 20% of our capacity is unplanned. And what that allows us to do is when we come in the morning, we can review the schedules from the day before, the week before, the night before, and if there are any unforeseen production challenges or any emergency spares or repairs requests from the field, we can easily fit those into our flexible system and take care of those usually within a day or two. There's obviously supply chain concerns, and we've got to have everything queued up and ready to go, so there's a lot of front-end planning that goes into being able to have that level of serviceability. But yeah.
Amanda, we talked about that and we debated briefly, and if we should even bring this up, but we're flexible almost to a fault. Right, you want to add in anything on that? That we get phone calls that you and Michael come in and go, a customer needs something now, right? Something happened overnight, our government customer needs something now, and we take that call.
Yeah, and it's daily, and it's every morning, and Mike does a great job orchestrating all of that, but we need to be able to break into all of our, production equipment in order to make whatever we need to make. And that level of, reactive it's complex. It's hard to imagine all of the things that are constantly being orchestrated in order to bring that together for the customer at the end, but we make it happen, and that's part of our competitive advantage is that we're able to adapt to any changing situation.
Okay. And Matt, I'll let you jump in on this just as one last comment. Again, this isn't, and as an advocate for the system, this is not a sales pitch for us. This is really promoting the value of small business manufacturing as a way to support our national security. And so Matt, do you want to chime in on the value of a customer being able to very quickly, almost overnight, reach a person like an Amanda or a Mike and kind of get an entire factory reshifting, and I know you've had those experiences, or get someone like a Matt on the phone, and this is a small business value add. Do you want to say anything to that?
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? That some of our larger competitors, if they have an issue, right, you may be not only talking to that representative in that company, but to the subsidiary that owns them, to the parent company that owns them, and it may take a long time to get a response, right? If someone in the audience has a question about a pump part and can we machine that, right, when this ends, Amanda, Mike, and I, we'll talk to the boss, right, and we'll get that part turning probably before the day is over.
Thank you. So I'm going to give it a real-life example, and then we're going to send it back down the line to talk about how we can take this example and scale it to more opportunities, right? For anyone in the audience who's an industry partner, a government partner, whoever that may be, right? We want to do more of this. And again, this isn't just us. We want more small business manufacturers to be doing more of these. Okay, so here's the example. We're going to talk about the TAGRS program. Is anyone familiar with this? TAGRS, the Marine Corps Portable Fuel Pump? Yes? Okay, we've got one. Phenomenal, sir. You get an A+. I'll give you your sticker afterwards. So this is About an $11 to $12 million program. It had 74 systems with a 2-year part supply. So this is something that a large defense contractor is not interested in. 74 units, $11, $12 million, not going to move the needle for them. For us, for a small business manufacturer, that's perfect for us. But here's the other thing. The Marine Corps needs this item. This is actually mission critical. Matt, would you like to very quickly, in 1 or 2 sentences, explain why this system is actually really important for the Marine Corps? They drop it, like, can you just, yeah.
Sure, it's a forward deployed, aircraft refueling system. So as we look at, the future potential conflict in the Pacific, this will be a critical part of our logistics chain.
Right, just so I don't have to talk all the time. But we did one other thing that I think is really noteworthy. We allowed the military to scan our parts. So when they are in the field and they need to produce something, they can now 3D print those parts. That's really important. So we have a 2-year part supply. So this team over here is going to be making sure that they have parts availability on site, domestically made, ready to ship overnight when needed. And the government has scanned the parts on this unit. So when our Marines are in the Pacific on those islands and they need a part made, they will 3D print it. That is so powerful. So what I want to do is talk about these 3 pieces of this program and how we can replicate it as a nation, as industry partners and as government partners writing these programs. So, Matt, requirements. If you are writing a requirement and you want to replicate this or try to get something close to it, what can someone do to have requirements built in to have some of the best parts of this? The small business piece and maybe the 3D printing piece.
Yeah, I think the requirements development is critical, and sometimes there's an assumption that small contracts are good for small businesses and big contracts are good for big businesses, and that isn't always the case, right? We have to look at the specific capabilities of what the customer needs and the capabilities of that business regardless of their size, and figure out what the best competitive landscape is to get the best product for the government. So I'd start with just looking at it, what is that field? And a lot of times what we see is that some of our end users don't fully appreciate the way a requirement might change that competitive landscape, right? So as an example, and kind of a nerdy one, right? But let's say we have an impeller on this product, and we're just copying specs from the last time somebody bought an impeller. We'd say we want an alloy that includes tin in this brass. A lot of brass includes a little bit of tin. Well, if that goes to a large publicly traded company, because tin is a conflict mineral, every spec of that tin has to be traced from that company back to the smelter. It's a big administrative burden for them. Now, we're a small privately held company, so we technically don't have to track that. So we have a little bit of an advantage there. But now if you structure that with us as a subcontractor, right, where we're in the supply chain of the large business, we take on that same reporting requirement. So now this big burden does get shifted to us, right? So it's not to say you should or shouldn't put tin in an impeller. That's a decision for the end user. But it's understanding how that could impact the cost to you and to your supply chain. Another great example we had was we had a customer looking at a piece of equipment, and one version of this equipment they had seen had a nice cloth cover with some magnetic closures. It was kind of a nice to have. It wasn't big on their list, but they initially wrote it into the requirements, and they said, yeah, we want a cover like this that you can just throw on there and the magnets snap closed. That would be great. And then as they started researching, they wondered why more people weren't responding to their RFI, why there weren't more people competing for this project. And it turned out that the equipment itself, they could have had great competition on, but this cloth cover with rare earth magnets that snapped closed had a very limited supply chain. There were only 1 or 2 producers of those items. So even though everyone could produce the essential piece of equipment, and they could have had a very competitive bidding process, because of this nice-to-have cover that they didn't really even want, right? Someone else just saw it and said, yeah, that'd be nice. They drastically changed the level of competition on that project. So again, if you need the cover, order it. But if it's a nice-to-have, really think about how is that going to impact the supply chain and the level of competition that you're getting.
And the one thing that you didn't say that I'll yes and you on is, with small business manufacturers, when you're in that RFI process, like, call us. Call whom asked the question, right? Because that's the opportunity to find out, if I do this, what's the implication of the implication? That's our job, right? And so whether it's a Rob Bond or a Matt Dursa, Amanda, Mike, whomever, like, we've done this before. We've done this for the Department of Defense since World War II. There's small businesses around, like, we'll know the implication of the implication, and we want to advise you on that. And so that's the opportunity there as well, is if you don't know, that's the time to engage in the conversation and ask, because we're really in it for you to be successful. Great. Okay, so Mike, I'm gonna actually hand it to you. So there was a 2-year parts supply package on this. It's interesting, we manufacture, maintain, and stock a lot of parts in the middle of the country, right by a lot of great logistics to get it out to the world. Do you want to talk about how that's an opportunity to make sure any end user can get the parts that they need, and how parts supply is a great thing to add in, and how you as kind of a manager in the engineering space would love to see be able to fulfill that?
Yes. Not only do we stock a lot of components, but we approach it on the front end knowing that serviceability and spare parts are going to be needed in the future. So we set up our manufacturing space again with that flexibility, where we're non-traditional manufacturing. We don't ramp up our manufacturing and change over all the flow to support just current product, but we keep in mind that we're going to have to go back, once a year, once every couple years, and do those spare parts, those repair parts for the product that's already out in the field. Setting up your system with that flexibility in mind on the front end takes a little bit more work, but then it's very easy to react to sudden requests or urgent requests for product that's even decades old.
I mean, we do get, because of the role that I sit in, and again, this isn't about us, this is about most small business manufacturers kind of in this high mix, low volume world, we're supporting parts support for products 25 years old, right?
Correct.
And we'll have engineers come in and say, I'm working on a part, I see your name on it, so I'm calling up, right? And we'll say, yeah, we'll figure it out for you. You obviously need this to work, so we're gonna make it work. And I would say that a lot of small business manufacturers have that same mission and model in place. Would you agree, Mike?
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, Amanda, last point on the taggers example. I love the 3D printing. I came from some time at GE, and I think this is incredibly revolutionary to do additive in the right places and times. And so for our organization and a lot of small businesses to be able to enhance and empower end users and military personnel in advanced positions to be able to 3D print on demand is, again, life-saving. So Amanda, talk about how you would be able to get in front of this, right? Because if you're gonna 3D print a part 2 years from now, you better manufacture the original part the right way so you can 3D print it later, right? So that might change the original engineering design.
Absolutely. In fact, it's when you are looking at taking a component, any component, you have to think about the complexity. Where are the critical features, and can you scan those critical features? So if they're internal, you might not be able to actually see inside the part well enough to scan what you need, and you might have to design it so that pieces are removable, so that it can be scanned. And then when you start looking at, okay, how am I gonna print this? The original material that you're using might not be available for printing. So now how am I gonna make sure that this design goes with the original material, and then when it goes out in the field, is that material also going to work? Do I have to worry about other considerations? Am I going to want it to be some type of composite print instead of metal when it's being printed in the field? And if so, now I have to worry about other things, like how is it gonna interact with fuels? How is it gonna absorb other liquids? There's a lot of considerations. And that all comes in at the very beginning, right? Where you're talking about those requirements and you're talking about what does this need to look like, not just through this original manufacturing run, but later on in the field, somebody can't wait the week or whatever it takes to get something from the factory. They need it right now. How are we going to set that up in a unique way so that it can be serviced quickly and be available as fast as possible?
Yeah. Are you going to add anything in there? And I think this also aligns with that interoperability directive as well, right? That we need it to work, and it's not about us. You know, our business models support the idea that we're comfortable, you know, with critical parts being scanned for usage in the field. But we also have incredibly talented, world-class employees that can be in the front end with end users and, you know, top-end engineers at the DoD to do systems design with that creativity and flexibility needed, and then adjust our manufacturing facilities to be able to accommodate that, because we're not locked in to a different model. Like, we're locked into the model that it very much accommodates defense manufacturing. Amanda, I'm gonna ask you to go a little bit farther there, because you do this. Like I said, like, we actually do this. So give a real life example. And I know that you have a quote, but I don't know if you can attribute the quote to another prime OEM that we work with, but you know, you sat with people and like brainstormed solutions. Do you want to share that example?
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to say, like, one of the really exciting things about small business is, you know, the career itself, right? Where you get to be like an expert in so many different things, and it's really unique, but it gives you a perspective that helps all the way through the process. So one example is working with one of our primary customers. We looked at a new product for them, and as we were going through that process, we were able to take, you know, us who are going to, we didn't have some big hierarchy, right, that we were going through, so we're able to take the people that are day-to-day impacting what's going to happen through the entire process. We're actually sitting with the engineers. We're actually talking about, okay, this goes through our production flow. How does that look? How can we design this differently so that we can maybe reduce the number of operations, we can make it lighter weight, we can do something that's going to help us in manufacturing. And then when it leaves our facility and it's going into their production flow, what are we going to do there to make that easier for them? Those kinds of conversations they're just very critical up front. And we're able, as a small business, and we're able to keep those conversations to this really great interactive group that's making decisions the entire time. And there isn't this long, drawn-out process to it. Like, we can actually react very quickly.
Great. And Mike, you had brought up earlier that, and this isn't on any other organization, but because of the way our company works, our frontline employees are really skilled and talented, and they sit in those conversations, right? Like our machine shop workers. Can you want to add to that?
Sure. We do include our production line workers in most of these meetings. Everybody knows those are the actual experts. They're doing the work. So their input is valuable. We take it to heart. But they're also a key part of our system where their skills and abilities are just as interchangeable as our equipment. So keeping our employees in that highly skilled, highly capable arena is very important.
Awesome. All right, well, we have one final official question before we open up for Q&A, and that is if all of you didn't pay attention to one thing we just said for the last, I don't know, let's see what we're at here, 36 minutes, and these individuals had one message, like one takeaway each of them want you to hear, what is that, right? If they heard nothing else and you're like, okay, but here's one thing, please remember, or two or three, this is your time, what would that be? And we're actually going to start, I'm sorry, Matt, we're actually going to start with Mike, and then we're going to come towards me. So Mike, go ahead and start. This is your one kind of final, if they didn't listen to you except now, what is the one message you'd like them to hear about small business manufacturers for national defense?
Well, sure. As businesses scale up, What they tend to do is focus more on traditional metrics, like operator efficiency or equipment efficiency. What we tend to do is, while those are important, they're not the key driving metrics that we use for our manufacturing. And that allows us to scale up or down to meet customer needs. We're focused more on end value for the customer and using our equipment and employees to provide the best overall value for the customer, not necessarily to make the one individual component very effectively or efficiently.
Well said. Amanda, how about you?
Along the same lines as Mike was talking, when we think about kind of the history of manufacturing in general, and we think about all these different paradigms, all these philosophies that have been brought into manufacturing and implemented in high volume spaces. We've got lean manufacturing, quick response, Six Sigma, those types of things. Small businesses have kind of curated this place where they're taking those different philosophies and they're adapting them. And that's the creativity that they bring into everything that they're doing. And again, it's about the overall value. We're making, trade-offs wherever we need to that maybe would be looked at as a, frowned upon metric in a high volume space. But for us, at the end of it, it's about what's that total value that we're offering. It's very exciting for small businesses to have that kind of adaptability and flexibility.
Awesome. Go ahead, Matt.
I think I would drill down to the quality of the product itself, right? All these, the manufacturing methods, the strategic initiatives, these things only work if the product itself is great, right? And what gets me really excited, right, are products like the P100. And again, you could wonder why a lawyer would get excited about supply contracts for a pump, right? And it's because I think of the moment that pump is needed, right? And having a career at sea, understanding what that means, right? So that isn't just a pump that left our factory or a pump where delivery was accepted. It's been sitting in a damage control locker, getting rocked and rolled for months, right? It's been getting sprayed by salt water. It's sailors, so I think we all know at least one of those preventive maintenance entries, right, has been gun decked. And now in that moment where it's needed, it's being pulled out by someone who might not be a fully trained damage control person, right? That they might just be in the billet that got ordered to get that pump out. And their adrenaline is surging, the general alarm is going off, right? Like you think about that moment, what that means for that ship and for those sailors, right? And that's not a technically acceptable moment, right? That's not a good enough moment. That is a moment where you need, right, an engineer who cared very deeply about every aspect of that design. You need Mike and his team to have cared about every single bolt, right? We need to have removed every little bit of doubt, every bit of chance, because we need to have done everything we can for that sailor. And I love that we have delivered that in the past. I love that we're gonna keep delivering that. And so when people think about, what do small businesses do, right? I'd wanna move it away from the big picture strategic initiative and be like, no, we save lives, right? In that moment, we delivered the best quality product when nothing else would do.
That's beautiful. And I thank you. I asked Matt, because he's served on many ships, and I said, could you tell the difference? Could you walk a ship and tell the difference between something that was manufactured by a large corporation and a small business? And he said yes, that he could actually tell the difference because of the way it was labeled. Like that you could actually see like a small business made this because they understand the use case, they understand the function, and they understand that this needs to be able to be picked up and function by everybody. The materials, the labeling, that they actually get my business. And I thought that was also, to your point about saving lives and being functional, that like that's incredibly powerful about the product is there when you need it, and when you need it in this line of work, it is actually life or death. So thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna give mine because I'm the moderator and I get certain rights and privileges. And then we're gonna open it up for Q&A. If you don't have questions, I actually have 3 that were submitted in the hallway in advance. 1, diversity breeds innovation. Diversity of body experience, industry type, all of the above. I love the tension between industry and government, right? Interoperability, I've sat in a lot of rooms with government officials, and they want interoperability, but that is not necessarily in line with our capitalistic model, right? Ford and GM don't want their parts interchangeable, and I love that tension and conflict. I think that's what makes our nation and our economy and our people great, is that there is tension and conflict and static, and that makes us smart and hungry. And I like that hunger. That makes us want it more and figure it out more. There is no playbook. If anyone here is sitting here saying we figured it out, and anyone in this room says, here's what we're gonna do, it's just not true. We don't have the playbook for what's gonna happen. We have smart people who are gonna roll up their sleeves and sit down with you and say, where do you wanna go? And here's 3 ways of how we're gonna get there, and let's figure out the most cost-effective way to do it that's gonna save lives and get your guys what they need. We call it managing your cost of learning, right? And then I just want to remind you that in this idea of innovation, small iterative innovations can actually be really, really thoughtful and impactful in the grand scheme of things. And we see it in the work that we do, we see it in the devices that you use every day as consumers, and we see it in the industry. So if there's something that you walk away with as you go about your day-to-day, don't let bright, shiny objects and the idea that bigger is better blind yourself to the idea that sometimes just a slight placement on something or a slight rethinking of an end user, and we talk about this as well. An individual who says, if you just tweak it this way, that's iterative, but it could save a life, it could change the entire dynamic, the shape, the design, and to me, that's powerful engineering because someone on a shop floor who works that CNC machine gave us insight. And because the small business listens to the machinist, who's been doing this for 30 years, who tells a manager who listens, who tells a systems engineer, who's actually the national authority on systems engineering, a discipline that was invented by the national defense industry, listen because she believes in small businesses, even though she could go anywhere she wants, who has the cell phone number of our compliance officer, who works directly with the DoD. And that's how change happens. And that is absolutely incredible. And that's how we win. And that is our right to win. And so with that, we are going to open it up for questions. And thank you so much for being here. Any questions from the audience? And we do have 3 that were submitted in advance. Go ahead, Paul.
Can you talk a little bit about the impact of CMMC and perhaps a little bit about the quality standards that Darley meets as a part of our meeting our quality needs of our customers?
Yeah, CMMC actually was one of the questions that came up just around risk management, especially with some of the other contractors we work with. Do you want to take that one, Matt? A little bit, and maybe just more on like federal risk management and the different things we have to comply with.
Sure, and again, I think small business stereotypes that are out there is that we either don't have to comply with these things or that we don't. But the reality is, cybersecurity, Chinese telecommunications restrictions, those all apply to small businesses just as much as the large one. In fact, I'd say they're probably the biggest barrier to other small businesses joining us. So we do have to meet those demands, and a lot of times, frankly, we're better at it, right? Because a small business may have a smaller computer network, right? If you're a large multinational corporation, how do you secure that network? That's a huge challenge. Where some of the small businesses that we've worked with, in fact, we've brought up cybersecurity of our suppliers, and they've said, well, we've brought our system down to 2 computers, right? They realize that not everybody needed to be carrying their own laptop. So sometimes smaller can be more secure, right? You can limit your inventory. You can take some steps to trim down and alleviate the unnecessary. So yeah, I think it's really important to remember that we're meeting those same security standards for a lot of different reasons.
Great. I've got another question here. Is there anyone from the audience that wants to ask about small business manufacturing, DoD contracting, small businesses in general? Go ahead, sir. Yeah. really good question. So I'll give you a high-level answer, and then I'll actually follow up with you and Rob Bond, who is part of that program development. So that was done, it was very much done as part of the program design. And when I talked to Rob, and he was actually really proud of it, it was done as part of the program design work. And I'll connect you with him, but I would say it's bigger than a proof of concept. We're bringing it up here because it's in line with what I'll call like Big Navy's, strategic goals. And it was the right thing to do because we knew that there were going to be things where this unit was going to be used that we just weren't going to be able to do with the 2-year supply unit, like the parts and supplies. So it wasn't every piece of it, right? Like there wasn't scanning on all the parts, and it didn't necessarily take intellectual property of the manufactured items, although when you're doing something program of record with the government, I'm sure that, and my lawyer here can kick me under the table. So it wasn't the entire unit itself, but there were specific components within there that made sense for the unit when it's going out to these various steer environments that the military and us were like, yeah, no, you should 100% scan these. And also, the Marine Corps is still testing 3D printing in those environments, so it's a bit of a proof of concept on both sides. But for us, we're very open to say, yeah, for these parts, we know our business and we know that you're going to come back because we're going to do the right thing. And there's no way that we can fulfill a unit order if you need it tomorrow and you're in a far-reaching island in the Pacific. But I'm going to connect you with Rob Bond, who does all the program management, to get you more details on that. Do you want to say anything about intellectual property and how we work on the programs with the DoD?
I think at a high level, just that's probably a topic, again, a small business is more willing to negotiate on, right? To me, spare parts is really where we shine. Again, if you say, if DLA says we might need one of these parts once a year for the next 30 years, a large corporation with shareholders just isn't going to see the profitability in that. We'll make parts for you for, a fire truck that was built in 1910. If you call us up and ask for it, as Amanda said, we're flexible to a fault. So we take that on just as part of the service that we provide as a business. And frankly, it's not a huge profit driver. So if the answer is, well, we like to make the part ourselves, then there's very often an avenue for us to negotiate and work on that.
Yeah. I like that are you excited by it though? Because when Rob told me that, I went, that is amazing. Is that how you feel about it as well? Yeah. One thing, and I'll piggyback on this, that we talked about in preparation for this panel is the replicability of that. And obviously, we want more small business, and we'll call it set-aside opportunities to shine in that. So, Matt, maybe you can double-click in a little bit on less about the CPARS aspect, but more about like the proposal writing on how things can be written where we have the opportunity to say we can do this, right? Because if the NAICS codes and if the specs aren't written in a way for us to lean into that, then it's hard for us to show that competitive advantage. So that's actually kind of a dovetail into one of the questions is, okay, so I want to support small business manufacturing. I do this all the time. What can I do to do better? And it does come down to the right NAICS codes and what can people do to add in a requirement like that?
Yeah, I think the requirements development is critical, right? And I wouldn't even say support small businesses, right? I'd bring it back to get you what you need, right? And if we're the best fit for you, then we're absolutely going to deliver that. And if we're not, then maybe the competitive landscape needs to be a little bit different. But I think it's all about taking that time. Again, we talk to an end user who isn't happy with whatever was delivered through the procurement process. I'd say 9 times out of 10, somebody skipped over that requirements development or pushed it through really quick. And if I told you that I hated the car that I bought, and you said, well, did you test drive it? Did you read consumer reports? And I said, well, look, I was just really busy and I needed a car, but I hate the one they delivered. you look at me like I was crazy, but a lot of times we do see military end users taking that approach of just like, I just need a thing, and I'm sure the manufacturer's DLA, I'm sure everybody else will figure it out and give me exactly what I want. And that doesn't work out. So I think, yeah, developing those requirements, and again, going to industry, whether it be an event like this or through a formal RFI or whatever process, to gather as much information as possible, because sometimes things like that little snap on the fabric can have a huge impact, right? Or that speck of tin can really change who's competing on your contract. And we want to make sure you have as much competition as possible so that you get that best value.
Awesome. Any other questions from the audience today? Yes, sir.
Mason Carter from Shen Technologies. This is for Kimberly.
Yes, sir.
There's the prior preference theory that pretty much says that positive aftermarket experience gives you a competitive advantage to win the business and maybe win the business at a premium.
Mm-hmm.
In your role, have you done any studying in terms of repeat business and the word getting out to others that bring new business into Garlic?
No, that's such a good question. We have not done a formal, like I would say, marketing study. I will say that we have excellent CPARs, and so the answer is yes. When we find opportunities that are a good fit for us and we are a good fit for the customer, we find that our experience speaks for itself, and the government feedback is heard and listened to by those buyers. Did I say that appropriately?
I think that's appropriate, and I do think, yeah, again, while we may not have a formal study, again, you look at a product as I don't want to say plain, but a workhorse like the P100,
Yeah.
right? And there's a reason we're very proud of that, and there's a reason we put it out at trade shows, because it's a product that sailors know, right? Everyone that's gone through boot camp has put their hands on that product, and it's performed very, very well. So I think absolutely that proves that model. It's a great way to engage with customers where they do say, oh, I remember that thing, and they have a positive experience with it, and so they're more willing to talk to us about the next opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you. Here's what I'll say as a deeper answer to that question for the folks in the room, and I currently hold a title that says marketing, but my background has been in like commercial growth, and I've done business development. I love regulated environments because it's not easy, and you've got to follow the rules. And so hopefully you walk out of this room and you say, I know the name Darley, and I have somewhat of a positive memory of them, and I know that they work in defense. Right? That's what we want, and we want you to better engage in small business manufacturing. But you know what's going to matter as you think about that life cycle of business engagement? That we show up at every touch point, right? Because this isn't enough. When you do make that phone call to Rob Bond, if that's not a good experience, then that's not going to help. But I know it will be, because I'm able to get up on stage and put me on the line and my professional integrity and Matt's, right? And so I think there's exposure in that. And so when you get large corporations, and I've worked at them, there's a bit of a barrier because the brand itself can protect you. But here at small businesses, you're a little bit more exposed, and that professional integrity really has to stand. And so when you do get Amanda on the phone and Mike on the phone, and you do have an opportunity to sit with Rob Bond, who is in the room developing the taggers with individuals, and we're doing some really amazing work in our manufacturing facilities with individuals in multiple branches of the military. We want that work to stand on the side, but if you don't know about it, it's important that you know about it, but it's also important when you show up that those are lived experiences that prove it. And so it's that combination. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? We appreciate your time. We're happy to send this recording out if you give us your email. We don't do that kind of selling, but we'll send the recording out. And then we'll be here at the front to answer any one-on-one questions. Thank you so much for your support, for the work that's being done out there. We are grateful for your time and your service. And thank you so much for the panelists and obviously Navy and Navy League for letting us be here. This has been wonderful. Thank you.